Imagine you are a doctor. You are trying to save lives every single day. You watch people die from small cuts, from tiny wounds, from infections that seem so simple, but nothing can stop them. No medicine works. People die, and you cannot do anything. Now imagine that one morning, you walk into your laboratory, you look at a small dish, and you see something that changes the world forever. This is not a fairy tale. This is a true story. This is the story of Alexander Fleming, a man who discovered penicillin, a man who saved over 200 million lives, a man who almost threw away the greatest discovery in the history of medicine. This is his story. Alexander Fleming was born on August 6, 1881. He was born on a farm in a small place called Lockfield, in Scotland. The farm was in the hills. It was quiet. It was cold in winter. The land was hard and the work was never easy. His father, Hugh Fleming, was a farmer. He was a strong and quiet man. He worked the land every day of his life. Alexander was the seventh child in the family. There were many brothers and sisters. The house was full of noise and laughter, and sometimes arguments. But life on the farm was also full of lessons. Alexander learned to watch the world carefully. He learned to look at small things. He loved nature. He loved the fields and the rivers and the insects and the plants. He was always curious, always asking questions. Why does the grass grow here but not there? He would ask. His older brother Tom would just shake his head. I do not know, Alec. Just eat your dinner. But young Alexander could not stop asking, could not stop wondering. He was small, but his mind was always moving, always thinking. His father died when Alexander was only 7 years old. It was a hard time for the family. His mother, Grace, was a strong woman. She kept the family together. She worked hard. She made sure all the children went to school. Alexander walked a long way to school every morning, through fields, through wind and rain. But he loved learning. He was one of the best students in his class. He was especially good at science. He loved to understand how things worked. When Alexander was 13 years old, he moved to London. His older brother Tom had moved there and was working as a doctor. Alexander went to live with him. He studied in London and worked hard. London was a very different world. It was big and loud and full of people. Alexander came from a quiet farm in Scotland. Everything in London was new and exciting. He studied at the Regent Street Polytechnic. He was a good student. He liked almost every subject, but he did not know yet what he wanted to do with his life. Then something happened. One day, Tom came home from the clinic. He looked tired. He sat down and put his face in his hands. What happened? Alexander asked him. Another patient died today, Tom said quietly. A young man, 23 years old. He had a wound on his arm, a small cut. It got infected. We tried everything, but nothing worked. Alexander felt a cold feeling in his chest. Nothing worked at all? Nothing, Tom said. We do not have the medicine for it. The infection spreads, and there is nothing we can do. Alexander sat quietly for a long time. He was thinking, can it be stopped? He asked. Can someone find a way? Tom looked at him. That is the question, Alec. That is the biggest question in medicine right now. If someone can find a way to stop bacterial infections, they will save millions of lives. That moment stayed with Alexander. It burned inside him. He did not forget it. Alexander Fleming decided to study medicine. In 1901, he received a scholarship to St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London. He was 20 years old. He worked very hard. He studied every day and every night. He was an excellent student. He passed all his exams with top marks. His teachers noticed him. His mind was sharp. He was careful. He was precise. He paid attention to small details that others missed. In 1906, he graduated as a doctor, but he did not want to just treat patients. He wanted to do research. He wanted to find answers to big questions. He wanted to understand disease and infection. He joined the laboratory of a man named Almroth Wright. Sir Almroth Wright was one of the most famous scientists in Britain at that time. He was a brilliant but difficult man. He believed strongly in vaccines. He believed the body could fight disease if it had the right help. Alexander learned a great deal from him. He became a skilled researcher. He worked long hours in the laboratory. He tested ideas. He failed many times, but he kept going. Failure is not the end, he always said. It is information. It tells you something new. He was also known for his sense of humor. Even in the serious world of the laboratory, Alexander could make people laugh. He was kind. He was friendly. Everyone liked him, but inside, he was always working, always thinking, always searching. Then the world changed. In 1914, World War I began. Alexander Fleming joined the Royal Army Medical Corps. He went to France as a captain. He worked in battlefield hospitals. He worked close to the front lines. Every day, soldiers came in with terrible wounds, deep cuts, broken bones, infections, and people were dying, not just from the wounds. They were dying from the infections that came after. Fleming watched this and it broke his heart. He saw young men come in alive. He saw them get treated, and he saw them die 2 or 3 days later because of infection. The problem was the antiseptics. Antiseptics were chemicals used to clean wounds. Everyone believed they worked. But Fleming started to notice something different. He noticed that the antiseptics were actually killing the body's own defense cells. The white blood cells that fight infection were being destroyed by the antiseptic, and the bacteria were surviving deep in the wounds where the antiseptic could not reach. He ran tests. He wrote papers. He told his superiors that the antiseptics were not helping. In some cases, they were making things worse, but nobody listened. "You are just a young researcher," one senior officer told him. "These antiseptics are standard procedure. We have been using them for years, but the men are still dying," Fleming said quietly. "All we can do is use the best methods we have. Now go back to your work." Fleming walked away. He felt frustrated. He felt helpless. But he did not give up. He kept his notes. He kept his research. He kept his questions. Because he knew something was missing. There was a better answer somewhere. He just had not found it yet. The war ended in 1918. Fleming went back to St. Mary's Hospital. He went back to his laboratory. He was older now. He had seen terrible things. But those terrible things had made him more determined than ever. He needed to find something that could kill bacteria. Something that would not harm the body's own cells. Something natural. Something powerful. Something that did not yet exist. In 1922, Fleming made his first important discovery, and it came from a very unexpected place. He had a cold one day. He was working in the laboratory with a runny nose. Some of his nasal mucus fell into one of his petri dishes. A petri dish is a small, round, flat dish used in laboratories to grow bacteria. Fleming almost threw it away. But then he waited. He was curious, as always. He wanted to see what happened. A few days later, he looked at the dish, and he saw something remarkable. Where his mucus had fallen, the bacteria were dead. Something in his own tears and mucus had killed the bacteria. He got excited. He ran more tests. He discovered a substance that the body produces naturally. It was in tears, in saliva, in mucus. It could kill certain bacteria. He called it lysozyme. This was a real discovery. The body made its own natural antibiotic. It was proof that nature had answers. Nature could fight bacteria. But lysozyme had a problem. It was not strong enough to kill the really dangerous bacteria. The ones that caused serious infections, the ones that killed soldiers in the war. Fleming published his findings. Some people were interested, but the world was not excited. It was not the big answer. Fleming was a little disappointed, but he kept going. "This is a stepping stone," he told a friend in the laboratory. "It shows us the direction. Nature has the answer. We just need to find it." His friend nodded. "But how long will that take?" Fleming smiled. "As long as it takes." The years passed. Fleming worked. He taught students at St. Mary's. He treated patients. He ran his laboratory. He was well respected. But he had not yet made the discovery that would define his life. In 1924, he met a woman named Sarah Marion McElroy. She was known as Serene. She was a nurse. She was kind and beautiful and strong. They fell in love. They married in 1915. Actually, let us be more careful with the details. They married, and together they built a quiet and happy life. Fleming was not a man who showed big emotions in public. He was Scottish. He was reserved. But at home, with his wife and later with their son Robert, he was warm and happy. He had a good life. But inside, the question never left him. The big question from his days as a young man listening to his brother Tom. Can someone find a way to stop bacterial infections? He was still looking, still working, still waiting for the answer. And then came September 1928. This is the moment that changed history. It was the end of the summer. Alexander Fleming was about to go on holiday with his family. Before he left, he was cleaning up his laboratory. He was tidying the benches. He was stacking up his petri dishes. He had been growing bacteria called Staphylococcus in his petri dishes. Staphylococcus is a type of bacteria that causes skin infections, pneumonia, and many other serious diseases. Fleming looked at one dish before he threw it away, and he stopped. He looked more carefully. Something was very strange. There was a mold growing in the dish, a blue-green mold. It must have come in through the window or from another part of the building. Mold spores float through the air all the time. Usually, they land in dishes and ruin the experiment. They are a nuisance. Researchers throw away contaminated dishes without a second thought. But Fleming noticed something unusual. Around the mold, the bacteria were dead. There was a clear circle around the mold, like a little safe zone. The mold was producing something, and that something was killing the Staphylococcus bacteria. Fleming did not throw the dish away. He picked it up and held it to the light. "That is strange," he said quietly to himself. He called his assistant over. His assistant looked at it and shrugged. "Contaminated dish. Want me to clean it?" "No," Fleming said. "No, wait. Look at this. Look at the clear area around the mold." The assistant looked more closely. "The bacteria are dead there." "Around the mold, yes," Fleming said. "Why? What is the mold producing?" His assistant was quiet for a moment. "Maybe we should grow more of this mold and find out." Fleming nodded slowly. His heart was beating a little faster. He did not know yet what he had found, but he knew it was something. He did not throw away the dish. He kept it. He went on holiday with his family, but his mind never fully left that little petri dish on the shelf in his laboratory. When Fleming came back from holiday, he went straight to the laboratory. He grew more of the mold. He tested it. He tried to understand what it was producing. He looked at it under the microscope. He ran experiment after experiment. The mold was a type called Penicillium notatum. It belonged to the same family as the green mold you sometimes see on old bread. And it was producing a substance, a powerful substance. A substance that killed bacteria. Fleming named it penicillin. He tested penicillin on different types of bacteria. It killed many of the most dangerous ones. Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, the bacteria that caused pneumonia, the bacteria that caused scarlet fever, the bacteria that caused meningitis. He tested it on white blood cells. The white blood cells survived. Penicillin did not harm the body's own defense system. This was extraordinary. This was the opposite of the antiseptics used in the war. Those had killed the body's own cells. Penicillin only killed the bacteria. Fleming was excited. He wrote in his laboratory notebook. He wrote carefully. He took detailed notes, as always. He published a paper in 1929. The paper described his findings. He described the mold. He described penicillin. He described how it killed bacteria. He suggested that it could possibly be used as a medicine. And then, almost nothing happened. The world did not notice. Why did the world not notice? Why did one of the most important discoveries in history go almost completely ignored for over 10 years? There were several reasons. First, Fleming was not a chemist. He was a bacteriologist, a scientist who studies bacteria. He could grow the mold, and he could test the liquid it produced. But he could not purify penicillin. He could not make it stable. He could not turn it into a medicine that could be used in a patient's body. The penicillin liquid he produced was very weak. It broke down quickly. It was not strong enough or stable enough to be a real treatment. Second, Fleming was not a great self-promoter. He was quiet and modest. He did not stand up and shout about his discovery. He presented his paper and waited for the scientific community to respond. But the scientific community was busy with other things. Third, the time was not right. People were not yet ready to believe that a simple mold could change medicine forever. Some colleagues came to his laboratory. They looked at his work. They were polite. Some were mildly interested. But most of them moved on. Fleming continued to work with penicillin for a while. He tried to find a chemist who could help him purify it, but he could not find the right person. And slowly, other work took up his time. He did not forget penicillin. He kept the original mold alive in his laboratory. He kept his samples. He kept his notes. But the world had not listened. Was he sad? Was he bitter? He was human. So yes, sometimes he felt the sting of being ignored. Sometimes he felt frustrated that no one could see what he saw in that little petri dish. But he kept working. He kept teaching. He kept researching. He was a scientist. That was who he was. If you cannot solve a problem now, keep it alive, he once told a student. Keep it close. The answer will come. Maybe not from you, maybe from someone else. But the answer will come. He was right. He just did not know how right he was. Years passed. Fleming grew older. He was in his 50s now. He was well known as a scientist at St. Mary's Hospital. He was respected, but the great fame he deserved had not yet arrived. Then the world changed again. In 1939, World War II began. Once again, soldiers were fighting. Once again, men were dying from infected wounds. Once again, the doctors and scientists were looking desperately for something that could help. And at Oxford University, two scientists picked up an old scientific paper from 1929, a paper written by a modest Scottish scientist named Alexander Fleming, a paper about a mold and a substance called penicillin. Their names were Howard Florey and Ernst Boris Chain. Howard Florey was an Australian scientist. He was brilliant and practical. He wanted to turn scientific discoveries into real medicines. Ernst Chain was a German-born Jewish scientist who had fled from the Nazis and come to England. He was a brilliant biochemist. Together, they had the skills that Fleming had lacked. They could purify penicillin. They could make it stable. They could turn it into a real medicine. They read Fleming's paper with great excitement. "Look at this," Chain said to Florey. "This was published 10 years ago. Has anyone followed it up?" Florey looked at the paper carefully. "Not significantly. It seems everyone ignored it." "That is unbelievable," Chain said. "If this is accurate, This mold produces something extraordinary. Then let us find out if it is accurate, Florey said. They began to work. They worked day and night. Their laboratory was not fancy. It was simple and crowded. They did not have much money, but they had skill and they had determination. They grew penicillium mold in large quantities. They used old hospital bedpans, bathtubs, milk churns, and anything they could find to grow enough mold. By 1940, they had purified enough penicillin to test on mice. 8 mice were infected with deadly streptococcus bacteria. 4 mice were treated with penicillin. 4 were not. The next morning, Florey came to the laboratory very early. Chane was already there. They looked at the mice. The 4 untreated mice were dead. All 4 of them, the 4 treated mice, were alive. All 4 of them. Florey looked at Chane. Chane looked at Florey. "It works," Chane said. His voice was very quiet. "Yes," said Florey. "It works." They both stood there in silence for a moment. They understood what they were looking at. This was not just a laboratory result. This was the future of medicine. This could save millions of lives. The next step was to test penicillin on a human being. In February 1941, they found a patient. His name was Albert Alexander. He was a policeman. He had scratched himself on a rose bush. The scratch had become infected. The infection had spread all over his body. He was desperately ill. He was dying. There was nothing the doctors could do. Florey and Chane asked permission to treat him with penicillin. Permission was given. They injected Albert Alexander with penicillin. The next day, he was a little better. The day after that, he was better still. Within a few days, he was dramatically improved. He was sitting up in bed. He was talking. He was eating. He was smiling. The doctors could not believe it. The nurses could not believe it. Albert Alexander could not believe it. "I thought I was dying," he told Florey. "I was sure of it, and now I feel like a new man." Florey held his hand and nodded. "The medicine is working." But then a problem appeared. A terrible problem. They were running out of penicillin. The medicine was so precious and so difficult to make that they did not have enough. They recycled the penicillin from Albert's urine. They filtered it and reused it. But it was not enough. Albert Alexander began to get worse again. The infection returned. And this time, there was no more penicillin. Albert Alexander died. Florey was devastated. Chane was devastated. They had seen the medicine work. They had seen a dying man come back to life. And then they had watched him die because they simply did not have enough of the medicine. "We need more," Florey said. "Much more. We need factories. We need mass production. We need this medicine available in large quantities." But Britain was at war. The factories were busy making weapons. There were no resources for medicine production. Florey made a decision. He would go to America. Florey traveled to America in 1941. He met with scientists and with the government. He explained what penicillin could do. He showed them the evidence. America was not yet in the war. But American scientists saw the potential. They agreed to help. Big pharmaceutical companies started working on ways to mass produce penicillin. Then, in December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America entered the war, and suddenly, the need for penicillin became urgent. The American military needed it for their soldiers. The race to produce mass quantities of penicillin became one of the most important projects of the war. Scientists discovered that they could grow far more penicillin using a different method. Instead of growing it on the surface of liquid, they could grow it in deep tanks, like brewing beer. Large factories were built. Thousands of workers produced penicillin. By 1943, penicillin was being used to treat Allied soldiers in the war. Soldiers who would have died from infected wounds were surviving. Soldiers who would have lost limbs were keeping them. Soldiers who would have died from pneumonia were returning to their families. The impact was immediate. The impact was enormous. Medical historians later estimated that penicillin reduced the death rate from bacterial infections in the war from almost 20% down to less than 1%. That is an almost unimaginable difference. Thousands and thousands of lives were saved because of a mold, because of a petri dish, because of a man who had the curiosity not to throw away a contaminated experiment. Back in London, Alexander Fleming heard about the work at Oxford. He heard about the mass production in America. He followed the news with great interest. He went to visit Florey's laboratory in Oxford. Florey welcomed him warmly. They walked through the laboratory together. Fleming was quiet. He looked at everything carefully. "You have done remarkable work," Fleming told Florey. Florey shook his head. "We built on your discovery. Without your 1929 paper, none of this would have happened." Fleming smiled. "And without your work, my paper would have remained in a drawer forever." They shook hands warmly. Two scientists, different skills, different personalities, both essential to one of the greatest achievements in medical history. In 1945, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded. It went to three men: Alexander Fleming, Howard Florey, Ernst Boris Chain. All three deserved it. All three had played a crucial and irreplaceable role. When Fleming received the news, he was sitting in his laboratory. A colleague came running in. "Fleming! Fleming, you have won the Nobel Prize!" Fleming looked up from his work. He paused. He sat very still for a moment. "Have I?" he said quietly. Then he smiled. A small, warm smile. He put down his pen. "Well," he said, "that is very kind of them." And then people started arriving. Journalists, photographers, colleagues, students. Everyone wanted to see him. Everyone wanted to shake his hand. Everyone wanted to hear the story of the moldy petri dish. Fleming told the story again and again. He was gracious and generous. He always gave credit to Florey and Chain. He never tried to take all the glory for himself. But it was his name that became famous. Alexander Fleming, the man who discovered penicillin. Because the story of the mold in the petri dish was simple and beautiful and unforgettable. And because he had found the answer in a moment that almost became nothing. A moment that could have been thrown in the bin. Fleming gave speech after speech in the years that followed. He traveled the world. He met kings and queens and presidents. He received honorary degrees from universities all over the world. He was knighted by King George VI and became Sir Alexander Fleming. But he never forgot who he was. He never became arrogant. He never became cold or distant. He was still the same quiet, warm, curious man from the farm in Scotland. At a dinner in his honor in New York, the room was full of famous people. Scientists, politicians, businessmen, doctors. Everyone in their best clothes. Everyone there to celebrate the great Alexander Fleming. Fleming stood up to give his speech. He looked around the room. "I must be honest with you all," he said. "I did not discover penicillin because I was brilliant. I discovered it because I was curious. And because I was lucky enough to be paying attention." He paused. "Nature gave us the answer. Nature always gives us the answer. Our job, as scientists and as human beings, is simply to keep our eyes open." The room was silent for a moment. Then they applauded. But life was not only triumph. Fleming also knew grief. His beloved wife Serene died in 1949. They had been married for 34 years. She had supported him through all the years of quiet work, through all the frustrations, through all the setbacks. She had believed in him when the world was not paying attention. Losing her was deeply painful. Fleming became quieter, more withdrawn. He threw himself into his work as he always did, but those who knew him well could see the sadness in his eyes. Then, 3 years later, in 1952, he married again. His second wife was Amalia Kautsouri-Vorica, a Greek bacteriologist who worked in his laboratory. She was younger than him, warm and intelligent. She had admired Fleming for years as a scientist. As they worked together, admiration became friendship. Friendship became love. Fleming was happy again. He had companionship. He had love. He was 70 years old. He was knighted. He was famous. He was loved. And he was still curious, still working, still going to his laboratory every morning. He once told Amalia, "I am most alive in the laboratory. When I am looking at something through the microscope, or when I am running an experiment, I feel like the world makes complete sense." Amalia smiled. "And outside the laboratory?" Fleming laughed. "Outside the laboratory, I am just an ordinary man trying to understand why his roses are not growing properly." On March 11th, 1955, Alexander Fleming had a heart attack. He died in his home in London. He was 73 years old. The world mourned. Messages came from every country, from doctors, from scientists, from ordinary people whose lives had been saved or whose loved ones had survived because of penicillin. Fleming was buried in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, one of the most honored burial places in Britain. Reserved for the greatest of the great. At his funeral, the Spanish called him "our Fleming." The French called him "our Fleming." Every country claimed him, because every country owed him something, because every country had people walking and breathing and living, because of what he had found in that moldy petri dish in September 1928. Now let us stop for a moment. Let us think about what this story really means. Alexander Fleming was not born into a wealthy family. He was a farm boy from Scotland. He walked miles to school in the cold. He lost his father at the age of 7. He had to work hard for everything. He made his discovery not because he had the best equipment, not because he had the most funding, not because he was in the most famous laboratory in the world. He made his discovery because of one quality above all others: curiosity. He looked at a ruined experiment and saw something worth investigating. Most scientists would have thrown that dish away. Most people would have thrown that dish away. In fact, many scientists had probably seen similar contamination before and thrown it away without a second thought. But Fleming stopped. He looked, he asked, "Why?" That one question, that one moment of curiosity, changed the history of medicine, changed the history of the world. Think about the other lessons in this story. Think about how Fleming was ignored for over 10 years. He published his paper in 1929. No one listened. No one acted. The discovery sat quietly in the scientific literature, almost forgotten. While people continued to die from bacterial infections that could have been treated, how did Fleming respond? He was frustrated. Yes, he was disappointed, but he did not become angry or bitter or destructive. He kept the mold alive. He kept his notes, he kept his samples, and he kept believing that someday someone would find the way to use what he had found. He was right. Patience is not weakness. Patience is wisdom. Think about Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, 2 scientists from different countries, one from Australia, one from Germany, both working in wartime Britain. They read a 10-year-old paper and took it seriously when no one else had. They did not say, "Someone should do something about this." They said, "We will do this." And they had the skills, the determination, and the courage to do it. This is another great lesson. It is not enough to see the problem. You must act. You must take the step. You must do the work. Fleming found the key. But it was Florian Chain who built the door. Think about Albert Alexander, the policeman who almost died from a rose thorn. A humble man, an ordinary man. He was not a scientist or a general or a president, but he was the first human being to be treated with penicillin. He was the bridge between the laboratory and the world. His suffering led to his treatment. His treatment, even though it ended in his death, proved that penicillin worked in the human body. His sacrifice, though tragic, helped push the work forward. History is full of such people. People whose names we do not remember. People who played a crucial role in a story they did not fully understand. But without them, the story could not have been told. And think about the mold itself. Penicillium notatum, a simple blue-green mold, growing on old bread and in the air all around us, producing a substance that kills bacteria, not because it wanted to help humanity, but because it was in a battle with bacteria itself. Nature was fighting its own battles long before humans arrived. The mold produced penicillin to protect itself from bacteria. Fleming simply noticed, simply observed, simply understood enough to see the potential. Nature is full of answers, full of solutions, full of medicines we have not yet discovered. This is why science matters. This is why curiosity matters. This is why we must keep looking at the world with open eyes and open minds. Alexander Fleming once said, "One sometimes finds what one is not looking for." Think about that. He was not looking for penicillin that September morning. He was cleaning up his laboratory before going on holiday. He was doing a routine task. He was about to throw something away, but he stopped. He looked. He wondered. And the world was never the same. How many discoveries are we walking past every day? How many answers are in front of us right now, waiting for someone to stop and pay attention? We do not need to be in a laboratory to practice this lesson. We can practice it in our own lives, in our relationships, in our work, in our learning. Stop, look, ask why. Be curious. Pay attention to the things that seem strange or unexpected or out of place. The most important moments sometimes look like interruptions. Fleming also showed us something about humility. When he became famous, when the world was cheering his name, when kings and presidents were shaking his hand, he never lost his humility. He always said he was lucky. He always gave credit to others. He always reminded people that the real heroes were the scientists who had done the chemistry, and the doctors who had administered the medicine, and the patients who had trusted the treatment. He understood that no great discovery belongs to one person. It belongs to a chain of people, a chain of questions and experiments and failures and breakthroughs. He was one link in that chain. An important link, yes, an essential link, but still just one link. Humility is not pretending you have done less than you have. Humility is understanding that everything great is built by many hands. In the years after penicillin was introduced, the world changed dramatically. Before penicillin, a simple throat infection could kill a child. Before penicillin, pneumonia killed millions every year. Before penicillin, a woman giving birth could die from a bacterial infection in the days after. Before penicillin, tuberculosis, scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, and dozens of other bacterial diseases took lives constantly. After penicillin, all of this changed. Infections that had been death sentences became treatable. Operations that were too dangerous became possible. People began to live longer. Children began to survive childhood illnesses. Mothers began to survive childbirth. It has been estimated that penicillin and the antibiotics that followed from it have saved over 200 million lives since 1940. 200 million people. Each one a mother, a father, a child, a friend. Each one a life full of moments and love and laughter and contribution to the world. 200 million people who lived because a curious man looked at a moldy petri dish and asked, why? Let us also talk about something important in this story. Something that modern English learners and young people can take very seriously. Fleming was a learner all his life. He never stopped studying. He never said, I know enough now, even when he was old, even when he was famous, even when he had the Nobel Prize. He went to his laboratory every morning. He looked through the microscope. He ran experiments. He read papers written by younger scientists. He asked questions of his students as often as he answered their questions, because he knew that the world is always bigger than what we currently understand. He knew that there is always more to learn, always more to discover, always more to know. This is the spirit of the true learner, not just in science, in everything, in language, in art, in business, in any skill you choose to develop. Every day is a chance to learn something new. Every mistake is a chance to understand something better. Every failure is a door that opens onto a new room of knowledge. Fleming understood this instinctively. He lived this way from the time he walked through the cold Scottish fields to school as a young boy, to the last morning he walked through the door of his laboratory in London as an old man. There is one more thing I want to say about Alexander Fleming's story. He was not perfect. No one is. He had weaknesses. He was not a great chemist. He could not do what Florey and Chain did. He sometimes found it hard to communicate his excitement to others. He was not always confident in pushing his own ideas, but he knew himself. He knew his strengths and his weaknesses, and he did not let his weaknesses stop him. He played to his strengths. He was the best observer in the room. He was the most curious person in the building. He was the most careful note-taker. He was the most patient experimenter. He worked with what he had. He gave what he had. And what he gave was more than enough. You do not need to be perfect to change the world. You do not need to have every skill or every advantage. You need to find your greatest strength and give it fully and completely. Fleming gave the world his curiosity. That was his gift, and it was enough. Let us also think about timing. Fleming made his discovery in 1928, but the world was not ready. The chemistry was not ready. The technology was not ready. The war had not yet come. 10 years later, the world was at war. Scientists were desperate. Resources were being poured into medical research. And at that moment, the work of Florey and Chain combined with Fleming's original discovery to produce a miracle. Sometimes we plant seeds that we do not see grow. Sometimes we do work that seems forgotten and unimportant. But the work is never wasted. The seed is in the ground. And when the rain comes, when the conditions are right, it grows. Fleming planted the seed in 1928. The rain came in the 1940s, and the tree that grew has sheltered more than 200 million lives. Never give up on your seeds. Plant them carefully. Tend them patiently. Trust that the right moment will come. I want to share with you one final story. A story about what happened after Fleming became famous. After the Nobel Prize, Fleming traveled the world. He gave lectures and received awards in country after country. Everywhere he went, people told him their own penicillin stories. In Rome, a woman came to him after a lecture. She was old now, but her eyes were bright and full of emotion. "Sir Fleming," she said in broken English, "I want to tell you something. In 1944, my son was dying. He was only 4 years old. He had pneumonia. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. He would not survive the night." Fleming listened quietly. But a soldier, an American soldier, had some penicillin. He gave it to the doctors for my son. By the next morning, the fever had broken. My son was better. The woman stopped. She was crying now. My son is now 30 years old. He has 3 children. He is a teacher. He loves his students. He loves his family. He loves his life. She looked at Fleming with deep, shining eyes. Sir Fleming, you gave me my son. You gave my grandchildren their father. Thank you. Thank you from all of us. Fleming was very still. He was not a man who showed his emotions easily, but his eyes were bright too. He took both her hands in his. It was not me, he said gently. It was nature. I only noticed. She shook her head. No, it was you. You paid attention when others would not. That is everything. That is the whole world. And perhaps that is the most beautiful summary of Alexander Fleming's life that we could ever find. He paid attention when others would not. A small boy on a Scottish farm, paying attention to the grass and the insects and the rivers. A young student in London, paying attention to the dying patients and the question no one could answer. A doctor in a war hospital, paying attention to the soldiers and the infections and the failed antiseptics. A researcher in a laboratory, paying attention to a contaminated dish that everyone else would have thrown away. A scientist in his later years, paying attention to young researchers and new ideas, and always asking more questions. From beginning to end, Alexander Fleming paid attention. He paid attention, and the world was saved. So here we are, at the end of this story, and now the story is yours. You are learning English. That takes attention. That takes patience. That takes the willingness to fail and try again, to hear something wrong and try again, to write something wrong and try again. Maybe you feel frustrated sometimes. Maybe you feel like you are not moving fast enough. Maybe you feel like the goal is too far away. Remember Alexander Fleming. Remember the 10 years of silence after his discovery. Remember all the times he was ignored. Remember all the patients he watched die while he searched for an answer he did not yet have. He kept going. He paid attention. He stayed curious. And one morning, the answer was right there in front of him on a petri dish. Your moment will come too. Your discovery will come. Your breakthrough will come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will come. Keep going. Keep paying attention. Keep asking why. Be curious about the world around you. Be curious about the words you hear and the phrases you read and the stories you learn. Stay open, stay humble, stay patient. And one day, you will look back at the journey you have taken, and you will see how every step mattered, every lesson, every mistake, every moment of effort. Alexander Fleming changed the world from a small laboratory in London. You have no idea yet where your effort will take you. You have no idea yet who you will become. But keep going. The world is waiting. Moral of the story. One moment of curiosity, one decision to stop and ask why, instead of walking away, can change the world forever. Never underestimate the power of paying attention, staying patient, and believing in your work even when no one else does. Great discoveries do not always come from genius alone. They come from curiosity, persistence, humility, and the courage to look at the ordinary world with extraordinary wonder.